Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Ramseyer. I work with Getvisibility here in Switzerland. I'll be your moderator for this afternoon. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's Swiss webinar on data classification for unstructured data. I'm just looking at the figures. We have over 150 people who are already signed on. Most of you will know me personally, but for those of you who don't, I'm a Swiss-Irish entrepreneur. My Swiss side is my second name, as in Ramseyer. I was obviously born and bred in Ireland, but I've been here in Switzerland for the last 16 years, and I'm happy to help you with any questions you would have in relation to Getvisibility. I'd like to extend a special welcome to our presenters, Matthias Bossardt from KPMG in Switzerland, who's the head of cybersecurity there. Matthias is going to be speaking about the drivers of behind data classification. Also on screen, you can probably see Ronan Murphy. Ronan is the world-renowned expert on cybersecurity, and he's also the CEO of Getvisibility. Now, Ronan is going to be talking about the opportunity around unstructured data. And finally, Derek Coetzee. Derek is the CTO of Getvisibility, and he will be talking about the challenges and the threats around data classification, and he'll show you Getvisibility in action. I'd also like to acknowledge our distributing partners here in Switzerland, Arrow Distribution, who have invited a number of their channel partners to participate. So welcome everybody, and thanks for taking the time. Now, the objectives of today's webinar are as follows. Number one, to get an overview of the challenges and the threats and the opportunities surrounding the unstructured data landscape. And number two, we want to talk to you about the innovations in the industry, a bit like about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and natural language processing, and how they contribute to the unstructured data landscape. We've been working here in Switzerland quite proactively for the last 18 months, and we've made some fairly good progress. Unfortunately, we were due to host a live event around this time, but you know, COVID-19 kind of threw a spanner in the works there. So just letting you know, we will be doing some events in the future, and we will hopefully see you at them live. And just before I start, I'd like to draw your attention to some of the polls that we'll be running throughout the webinar. The questions are going to appear on the right-hand side of your browser, and we'd really appreciate it if you could participate in it. There's only a couple of small questions there. So with that, I'd now like to hand you over to Matthias Bossardt from KPMG, who is going to explain the drivers for data classification. Take it away, Matthias.
Thanks. So data classification has become a mission-critical capability for organizations, both to leverage the value of data, but also to protect it. And it's also rather difficult, as you may know from your own experience, it's rather difficult to get it right. So when we started implementing digital rights management in a large organization 8 years ago, where classifying data was one of the key elements that we needed to do, making those users classify data consistently, but not killing the user experience at the same time, was actually one of our biggest struggles, and I think it still remains a challenge. So what are then the drivers for data classification? I see three key elements here. First is to enable and secure also new operating models. Now, particularly in Switzerland, we speak about moving to the cloud. Lots of organizations have moved or have started moving to the cloud, and COVID-19 only has accelerated this. So this means we need to understand where the data goes, and also where does that data go, and which data goes where. So with that rush that we have right now on cloud onboarding and on using applications as a service, we can expect quite some remediation work also in the aftermath to cope with that rush into the cloud. So that's the first point. The second point is leveraging the value that is in the companies or in an organization's data, be that with analytics or be that with artificial intelligence, where you need to train your models. So the word here is, the keyword is machine learning. And the third, last but not least, is driver is remaining compliant and also managing risks. So obviously, in terms of regulation, GDPR, so data privacy regulations in Europe, also the Swiss version of it, springs to mind, but it is much broader than this. There are other regulations, be that industry-specific regulations in banking, in pharma, in automotive, that drive this. Now, also with managing risk, classification is actually the basis to manage security risks. And the relevance of data classification is only going to increase, because in security, we move from a parameter, a security-based model, towards more of a zero trust type of model, where data classification, together with identity and access management, are actually key capabilities. How do we get that classification right, given that it's so difficult? So I think the first element is around user experience, because data classification has an impact, be that positive or negative, on the user experience. So one important point is that we need to automate it as much as possible to avoid that it becomes a burden for the users. Otherwise, either the user acceptance or the classification quality suffers. But the effective classification also means that we need to cover the entire data lifecycle. So the classification needs not only to work when I create a new document, for example, so when I create data, but it also needs to work for existing data, and it needs to stick with that data. And the third element is that it needs to cover not only structured, but also unstructured data. And classifying unstructured data is obviously more difficult and more cumbersome. So with that, Getvisibility has an interesting technology to address this, and I'm looking forward to Ronan's and Derek's presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthias. As always, very insightful and on point in terms of your observations. Before I speak about some of the industry forces that are impacting on the requirements around data classification, it would be remiss of me not to talk for a moment about COVID-19 and the impact that that's having on a global basis, because not only is it causing global disruption, but it's also changed the entire cybersecurity, infosec and data security landscape. We're observing changing patterns of behaviors from hackers and threat actors, and we're starting globally now to notice waves of coronavirus-related cyber attacks, and to be clear, this trend. It's not unique to a global pandemic. Hackers have typically preyed on victims shortly after disasters or high-profile events around the world. And from first-hand experience, I've observed malicious actors exploit human emotions for financial gain. Notable events around the world, such as the 2004 tsunami and earthquake, the mass shooting in Las Vegas, the Zika virus outbreak, they've all been used as lures for cyber criminals. And today, COVID-19 is not off limits. And why is that important when we talk about data? Well, as threat actors continue to adapt and to exploit this pandemic, the global workforce is changing dramatically. And I'm sure everybody on this webinar today is all too familiar with the challenges that's bringing, from much of the world practicing or being ordered now to practice social distancing, an unprecedented amount of people are working from home for the first time. And companies are rushing to provision laptops for users who would traditionally have worked off desktops. They're rushing to deploy collaborative software, to implement VPN infrastructure so that they can access the tools and the data within their environment. So if you were a hacker, what does this opportunity look like? Well, attack methods are logically going to exploit changes in global work practices and in work environments. And mass working over remote connections leads to mass remote login. It leads to your employees accessing your data from their home devices, from their mobile devices, in a lot of instances from unsecure devices. And what it results in is amplifying the ability of compromising an end user or an employee to get within the infrastructure of the organization and get to the core data. So I think that's a very important consideration for everybody now, and I'm sure it's all on. I see there's a lot of CIOs, CTOs, and CISOs on this, and that's something that's probably playing on your mind. But apart from that, what are the other forces which are driving the need for data classification? And as Matthias touched on, obviously you've got the governance, risk and compliance mandates globally. So at a macro level, we have GDPR, we've got CCPA in Switzerland, we have the Swiss Federal Data Privacy Act from 1992. But then from industry vertical perspectives, we've TISACs in the automotive sector, we've DFAR for suppliers to the US military, we've HIPAA for healthcare, and various different regulatory mandates for pharma. That coupled with an explosion in data, we're now creating more data than we've ever created before, and 90% of that data lives in the unstructured realm. In many instances, data is taken from structured environments and it's exported into an unstructured format. Back to Matthias's point, given the challenges we're now seeing with COVID-19, we're seeing companies expedite cloud projects and look to migrate large volumes of data into the cloud. And that presents very specific challenges, not only from a regulatory standpoint, but also from a user identity access standpoint, from a classification standpoint, and from an overall security standpoint. We're seeing a significant rise in cyber attacks, and those cyber attacks are primarily based around phishing and spear phishing and business email compromise with a view to compromising data. And then you have organizations wrestling to implement data loss prevention programs. And to Matthias's point again, the reason a lot of these are failing is that the engagement by the users is a challenge, and they find it difficult to comply with the overreaching requirements by the business to classify data. So we did a survey across our customers, and some of the findings were quite interesting, and I'm sure that they'll resonate. But across the companies we interviewed, 62% of companies found that they had large repositories of stale data. And that becomes a problem when you're migrating to the cloud, because storage becomes expensive, and obviously some of that data also has security concerns. And 59% of the data was suffering from ROT, which is the abbreviation for redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. And that, again, presents challenges on storage, on migration, and on security. And 57% of companies found that over 1,000 sensitive files were exposed. The average company found that over 500,000 files were exposed, and 19% all of their files were exposed. And then in 55% of companies, when we look at folders, it becomes quite challenging to manage. 100,000 folders were open. On average, employees in the larger companies had access to over 17 million files, and 28% of folders were open to all employees. So some stark findings in that specific survey. And interestingly, we traversed every sector from government, utilities, manufacturing, retail, and we looked at the files analyzed, the files exposed, and how the folders were exposed, all the way through to pharmaceutical. I see we've a lot of pharmaceutical companies in attendance today, but the level of either intellectual property or exposure on files was similar across all sectors. Derek, if you jump on for me there. So how companies are typically addressing this problem, and again, to Matthias's point, there's a lot of manual requirements on the end users. So here's a typical example. I'm sure you're all very familiar with this. Before you send an email or before you save a document, you will get some color-coded scheme that will allow you to determine if it's personal, general, confidential, or internal. And you can have a number of these different tags. That requirement is becoming more onerous depending on the regulatory mandate that the company has to adhere to. And also this relies really heavily on the users to accurately determine what that email or what that document actually is. But there's a bigger problem. Derek, if you'll jump on for me there, please. And that problem is that you have to look at the data from both sides. The first side is your legacy data, your data lake, and that can be your cloud environment, your internal file shares, Dropbox, OneDrive, SharePoint. And when you look at that, classifying that data, that is becoming mandatory for a lot of the regulatory mandates, including but not limited to GDPR, for dealing with ROT, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data, cloud migration, IP protection, data loss prevention. And these are typically large projects where you will try and get a grip of that data using regex or dictionary lookup tools, which unfortunately result in a lot of false positives. The second issue is what we've just shown, which is the new data, and that's the data that's created on the fly. It's data which you're sending in real time, and you have a large requirement on the end user to decide what that data is. And the reasons for that is your governance, risk and compliance mandates, your data hygiene, your visual tagging. With a two-tier approach to this problem, there's numerous challenges. Again, to Matthias's point, one of the biggest challenges is getting your users educated to a degree where they embrace this and that they accurately classify data across a large array of headings. And also it's the ability to get accuracy on your data lake. Unfortunately, two products require high levels of professional services. They tend to have a high risk of insider fraud. It tends to be very expensive, and it tends to take a very long time, like Matthias touched on. Some of these projects could last for 8, 9, 10 years to try and do it accurately. So what we're going to talk about today is why you should look at machine learning and artificial intelligence to simplify this process, and how you can take the legacy data lakes and the creation of new data, and you can close the loop in terms of how you do that. And we believe that because of the volume of data, the sensitivity of the data, the punitive compliance mandates that you have to adhere to, the best way to do this is to leverage AI or ML to do it. And what we're going to show you today is how that can help your organization very efficiently and effectively to improve accuracy on the classification of data, to provide faster results, a better return on investment, and with the ability for machine learning oversight and sophisticatedly trained models, it helps with your governance, risk and compliance mandates. It helps with many use cases like redundant, obsolete and trivial data, cloud migration. It's very important for IP protection. Who has access to it? Where is it? How can you lock it down? How can you put controls around it? How can you effectively enable your data loss prevention program? How can you tag data? And so forth. So that's enough of me talking. I'm going to hand you over to Derek, and Derek is going to show you how the application of AI and ML can make your life a lot easier when wrestling with this big beast of unstructured data. Derek?
Thank you. Thanks, Ronan. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Very good. I'm just switching my microphone on. So I will go back to the demonstration. So, right. So Ronan has given you an introduction on the problems that we are solving with Getvisibility. And what I'd like to show you is that we have developed software that operates on the desktop. So Ronan has mentioned that we have got users involved in classifying and tagging new data that they're creating. This is the right-hand side of that diagram that you've just seen. So what I'd like to show you is how machine learning can assist and augment what the users are doing, what the staff are doing. So for example, what I'd like to do is start up a Word document. So this is Microsoft Word. I'm going to open a brand new document. So this is an unclassified document that I got. Patrick supplied this to me. Thank you, Patrick. And this document is unclassified at the moment. So let's assume for this demonstration that this is sensitive information that is residing in this document. So machine learning and automation are two of the pillars that Ronan has mentioned, and also Matthias as well. So what we've done is we've extended the normal manual classification functionality by adding the ability for machine learning to augment and assist, as well as check. So to show you that, let's have a look at the basic functionality. This document is not classified. So for this demo, we have configured it to be very strict, and it does not, for example, allow me to save the document without classifying it. We do the same for printing. So what I'll do is you can see that we have added an icon in the ribbon. This icon, which is configurable, can be clicked, and you can see that we then get this dialog box which pops up, which has got the compliance levels that are configured for this customer. For example, we have GDPR. This is all configurable. This can be extended. You can see this particular demonstration configuration has got GDPR options, health information, and credit card information. And as a user, I can select these. This should look familiar. This is manual classification. You've also got the classification levels of how sensitive the document is, internal, confidential. Again, this can be customized. It can be multi-language. It's configurable to a high degree. But what is new is that our software is hooking into the machine learning capability of the Getvisibility platform to look at the text in this document. And based on the text in this document, it's doing recommendations or suggestions. So the user can click on Use Suggested and take these suggestions directly and apply them to the document. So this is interesting because it means that the system has got an opinion which is automatically generated about this particular document. So I can accept the tags that are being recommended. This is useful if you're a staff member that is unsure of the difference between two possibly very subtle differences. If you've got a large set of tags, maybe the person is new in the company, or maybe they've forgotten their training. So that's very valuable. We've already taken it to the next level by introducing this suggestion. But at the same time, the backend system is auditing and logging this particular recommendation against this document. So if the user chooses a different configuration, we're able to track the difference between those two opinions. And that difference of opinion can lead us either to increase the accuracy of the system, in other words, learn from that correction. And this is another benefit of machine learning. Or we can go back and suggest that that particular user might need some training, or at least some sort of security incident might have just happened. So let me show you though. I'm selected a particular set of tags here. I've now applied them to the document, which appear as visual markings in the header and footer. The wording is configurable. The position, font, and everything is configurable. What the actual content is configurable as well. You can also hide them totally. It also modifies the file metadata as well. So this information is carried along with the document. So our differentiator here is the machine learning assistance and sanity checking. So this is Word. You're looking at potentially saving and printing documents. But Outlook is a different kettle of fish altogether. Outlook is potentially a problem where data can be lost very easily because it has the mechanism to send data outside the organization. So let's have a look at Microsoft Outlook. And we're also, by the way, we have Office 365. We're working on Google Docs as well, the G Suite, and also mobile devices. So we will have good coverage of all the mobile and all of the application endpoints in the next 6 to 9 months. In this particular case, it's Microsoft Outlook. If I create a new email, this is considered an unclassified document. So you see the icon. So if I were to type in an email address, which is external to my company, Getvisibility, I've chosen Matthias' email from KPMG, who's on the call with us. We then have a subject, and I can paste some of that sensitive information from the previous document. This is a common, I'm sure, a common occurrence you've seen before. What we've got the system set up to do now is to block the transmission of unclassified emails. So there's intervention here based on the fact that it's unclassified. Okay, machine learning is not involved yet, but have a look at this. When I click on the classification, I get the same suggestions based on the content of my document. So it's looked at the text and it's generated suggestions. Again, with the benefits of it being the same as what the user chooses, which helps the user if they want to use the same values. But if they choose something different, that difference, that delta in the opinions of the machine learning and the user are significant. And we can track that either for improving the machine learning or for detecting potential problems inside the company. So let me finish this demo by showing you that I've chosen confidential. I'm saving that. Again, the email has some visual tagging, which can be customized. We're also modifying the header as well. This is now a confidential document, which sounds good. That's correct. That matches the level of information. We also adjust for attachments as well. But have a look at the situation that I have set up here. A confidential document going to an external email address. This is potentially dangerous. So on sending this, we're actually blocked. So again, everything that is happening is audited. Detailed reports can be generated, and I'll show you that in the next slide. But I'm not in the presentation yet. I'm still showing you in Microsoft Outlook that we have had this block warning come up. So as a user, for the purpose of this demo, I'm now going to reclassify or declassify the email to a lower level of sensitivity or confidentiality. This is dangerous, and it's for the purpose of this demo, but have a look. The tagging is modified. There is a small view of the audit log being added to the document here, to the email. But now if I try and send it, remember, this is still potentially confidential information, but I have declassified it. So as a user, I'm given a different warning. I'm now able to send this email after all because it's declassified. But this is potentially a dangerous activity, and our software can be configured to block this. But what is happening is that there is continuous auditing going on in the background. So if I were to send this, then I can continue and send this. Oops, press on yes. That email is gone now. But that's very interesting. That email could potentially indicate that data has been leaked outside the organization. So you'd probably want to set that to a block. But for the purpose of the demo, I had that as a warning. Right, so what can we do with this information? If I switch back to the presentation, what we're able to do then is we're able to derive high-level and detailed reports of the audits of what's going on the data. So remember, we're looking at users interacting with unstructured data being assisted by machine learning. And that's a big differentiator for us. The machine learning is allowing us to show how many blocked incidents are happening. We're tracking everything. We're also able to look at the de-escalations, because remember, that was a dangerous activity. The dangerous activity is reducing the classification of potentially sensitive data. But the machine learning has got an opinion of the sensitivity already. So we're seeing a discrepancy now between what the data is worth and what the user has done. And catching that difference is a unique selling point. We think it's super, super valuable that software and machine learning is able to assist in this way, that it's able to assist and augment decision-making in an automated fashion that's drawing attention to the problem areas. And that's what we're doing here. I'll show you another section, and this is narrowing in on that delta between the machine learning and the user. So the user has potentially misclassified a document, either in an email or an attachment. That misclassification can either indicate that we have discovered new types of documents in the organization and the Getvisibility system can learn from it, or that the user themselves needs to either be retrained or they need to be informed that they are misclassifying documents. Both of those are very valuable situations to be able to detect, especially because this is during normal operation. They're using Outlook, they're using Word, Excel, PowerPoint, G Suite. This is normal day-to-day activity that we are monitoring and we are assisting with. And that's very valuable, we feel. So again, machine learning is driving all of this extra logic and power. So I'd like to quickly show you a few slides from our server dashboard, which illustrates some of the concepts, and then I will hand back to Ronan. So our machine learning system has to be, any machine learning system has to have knowledge of the data set that it is working on. This can be derived and built directly off the data set in an unsupervised fashion, or it can be pre-built and be ready to go from day one. And that's what we've done with Getvisibility. And this diagram or this screenshot shows you some of the English classification document tags that we have already pre-trained in our model. You can see it's extensive. It links into classification levels, which are across the bottom, which in this particular case happened to be from Microsoft's Azure Information Protection, or AIP. So we're augmenting AIP, and we can turn off certain of our interactions with the user, and still AIP can benefit from the machine learning suggestions and sanity checking. And that's a very valuable combination as well. If I move on, this is a set of results. So if you consider the left-hand side of Ronan's diagram, which was the legacy data in repositories, such as SharePoint, file servers, and so on, Dropbox, Google Drive, we're able to configure the Getvisibility software to scan those, and the machine learning then looks at the document and categorizes them. It classifies them into the correct, in this case, AIP tags. It also finds compliance relevant data. This is all automated. It's machine learning driven. And again, the machine learning is driving the actual results that we are seeing here. This is one output format that can be exported. Detailed reports can be generated as well. And this is how we are working with our partners at KPMG. They are deriving additional intelligence from this detailed information. I'll quickly show you Active Directory permissions as well. So we can look at who can see a particular file, or we can also see for a given user or group what files they have access to. You can also track the email activities as well. So a brief slide, which I'm not going to go into too much detail, which shows the big picture. So what we've got on the slide is a cluster of Getvisibility management servers in gold, shown in two bubbles, and that's one logical cluster. So this is how we scale horizontally. We're then able to manage the endpoint devices, which are shown in their own bubble, using the agents, which you just saw. We're then also able to scan the blue boxes, which are your legacy data stores. All of this can lead to additional use cases and solutions. And Ronan will cover that in the next slide. But you can also see the other data sources. You can see AWS, for example, S3, Google, G Suite, or Google Drive, the Microsoft storage options in the cloud, and Dropbox, and so on. This is a big picture view where our machine learning is looking across the entire estate or data lake and is assisting with classification in an automated manner, but also helping the staff at the endpoints to do their daily job as well. So 2 quick slides before I hand over to Ronan, and that is just to summarize the legacy scanning. In this particular slide, you're seeing files on the left being scanned and classified into files on the right, which are now tagged. This is a popular use case for those legacy data. Left-hand side of Ronan's diagram. The right-hand side of Ronan's diagram is users that are interacting with the data are now being tracked, assisted, recommended, and also the actual accuracy in what they're doing is being monitored, and we can correct mistakes, or we can block sensitive data from leaving the premise, or we can interact with a DLP system, which addresses Ronan's point about the efficiency of a DLP system once it's augmented with machine learning. We feel that's a really, really good win-win situation. So, Ronan, I'd like to hand it over to you then to finish off, just to talk about some of the options derived from the data that we're generating.
Thank you, Derek. So what Derek has discussed there, folks, is he's looked at collapsing the model in terms of the technology stack. He's looked at dealing with live data, and he's also looked at dealing with the big problem of the large legacy data and data repositories or data lakes. Now, if you marry that up with one of the interesting points that Matthias made, it is that organizations are now looking at a zero trust model in terms of their overall cybersecurity posture. Zero trust is not a new concept. The term was coined by a Forrester researcher back in 2010, but it is a difficult position to achieve for large organizations. And one of the areas that they wrestle with is the ability to manage the unstructured data component. And as companies become more mobile and as companies create more data, that becomes a real challenge. And we believe the only way to do that is to utilize AI and ML to do it effectively. And some of the use cases we see customers using AI and ML for, and they're still growing, by the way, but some of the really interesting ones are identification of IP. You would assume that organizations know where their intellectual property sits, but the larger the organization gets and the more research and development departments within the organization and the more cloud resources they use, the ability to track that and to lock it down and to harden the defenses around it become incredibly difficult. And that gets exacerbated by global pandemics such as COVID-19. You're seeing like information migration, where companies want to consolidate systems being a challenge. These are underpinned by the regulatory mandates, again, at a high level, GDPR, the Swiss Data Act from 1992, the California Consumer Privacy Act, and then the industry vertical compliance mandates, TISAX, PCI, HIPAA, and so forth. And then obviously redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. There's the old cliche that data is a tremendous asset and it's very valuable, but I guess data now, given the type of fines you're seeing for Marriott and for British Airways, data can also become a tremendous liability. Again, Matthias's point, you've cloud migration, organizations looking at utilizing cheap storage and CPU and the ability to spin up servers quickly. But the challenges are that how can you migrate data safely, or how can you understand it? How can you ensure that the right people have access to it? And then when you do migrate that data, how do you ensure that it's properly protected, that you have effective data loss prevention, whether that's with ForcePoint, or whether that's with Azure Information Protection, or whether that's with Trend Micro? How do you tell these very sophisticated DLP tools what that data is, and how do you build the correct set of rules around that data? And doing that as a manual task is incredibly painful and results in a lot of failed projects. And then there's the ability to integrate your data problem and your data monitoring into your overall cybersecurity conversation. When you look at your security operations center, it's looking at the correlation of your firewall logs and of your proxy logs and of your antivirus logs. All of those tools and technologies are designed to protect data, but your SOC and your cyber folks typically are not looking at data. That's sitting with a regulatory group, your governance, risk and compliance group. So how can you marry the two of those together? You have to automate that capability. Derek, if you could jump on. So some of the benefits of using AI and ML for these type of challenges is that you automate it. Instead of it becoming a paper-based exercise where people are walking into your office with lever arch folders and manually trying to identify what data is important and where is it. You automate that process. You eliminate false positives because you have the ability to effectively train models that are highly sophisticated. The user experience is an enormous problem. If you're a very large company, you will be all too familiar with the challenges around getting your employees to a knowledge level where they can effectively classify to keep various regulatory mandates, compliance with those mandates, and also dealing with insider fraud. What if those employees want to take the secret sauce? What if they want to take the financial information? It's incredibly difficult to stop it, and it's very easy to work around. So the benefits there's a lot of benefits, and probably the biggest driver that we are seeing for companies investing in this technology is regulation. I mean, again, the Swiss Data Act, GDPR, TISAX, TFARS, all of these different regulatory mandates. It makes the problem very easy to deal with, and it makes it very easy to assign the duties to the various different departments to enable fixes on that data, whether those fixes are encryption, deletion, archival, migration. It fixes a lot of those problems. And then finally, by utilizing AI and ML, you collapse the technology stack. You no longer need two products. You no longer require two sets of professional services. You have a highly sophisticated, well-trained machine learning model that is trained on your legacy data and is also interacting in a symbiotic type fashion with the users within your organization. So within a very short period of time, the return on investment becomes very noticeable to the organization, and then facilitates successful security implementations such as data loss prevention and cloud migration. So that's a very quick overview. Patrick, will I hand back to you? I don't know if have we lost Patrick? Okay, I think we've lost Patrick. So were you there, Patrick?
Thanks very much for that, Ronan. Thanks very much for that, Derek. Extremely interesting. Listen, I think we can open it up to question and answers now, if we're okay with that. I have one question that came in already, Derek, from Jimmy in Liechtenstein, and he says, does the level of encryption change automatically once the email is classified as general, TLS, or confidential, PGP, S-MINE?
Yes. Okay, that's a really good question. So at the moment, what we're doing is we're integrating to DLP platforms that do take action on encrypting documents or emails. Right now, we don't have the encryption capability built into our system, but we expect to have that towards the end of this year. But it's already possible to encrypt and to define policies with DLP systems. And a lot of our rollouts with DLP platforms are using the DLP system itself to do the encryption. And the DLP system policy is predefined that certain levels of confidentiality or classification will have different levels of protection, which makes sense. But the DLP system is doing the actual encryption, and we're handing over the information of the actual real level of data sensitivity to the DLP system. But like I say, we're probably going to add that in the future as well. So if a company has not rolled out a DLP, or they've got it budgeted in a year's time, they can still turn on our ability to block and to encrypt data if they want to, until they roll out the full DLP system.
If I could supplement that answer, Derek, as well, please. What we typically see is that organizations, they tend to implement the data loss prevention controls and then retrospectively try and go and then architect the classification of the data, which makes a lot of DLP programs fall over. So in our view, it makes more sense to classify all of the data, do that large volume of work, and then to overlay your data loss prevention. And again, whether that's excellent technologies from ForcePoint or Microsoft or any of your chosen vendors, it's a very effective way of doing it. Once you understand the data, you can protect it. It's very difficult to effectively protect what you do not understand.
Just while I have you there, guys, I have one other question that came in. The person who posed the question wants to remain anonymous. I just said that they've seen some limitations around the Azure information protection system. Can you please comment, and can Getvisibility help in any respect?
Sure. If I can, maybe I have one point that I'd like to make there. We're working with Microsoft, and a lot of the AIP software is very powerful and, of course, integrates very, very well into the Microsoft tools, as you would expect. But the one section that they have shown a lot of interest in engaging with us on is the automated discovery. And this is, as Ronan has mentioned, it's that step of understanding the data that is out in the data lake, in the file server, that's possibly never going to be opened by a staff member, but still needs to be protected on the off chance that somebody does go back to a document. So how we're working with Microsoft is that we're providing a scanning and classification, so discovery and classification of documents and emails that are in either legacy inboxes or file servers. And we're tagging those, again, as Ronan mentioned, in fact, there was a slide showing that. We're tagging the documents so that when they are opened by a staff member in Outlook or in Word, that they've got the correct level of classification already in place. It's a very, very nice combination of powerful protection, encryption, and intervention by Microsoft during the day-to-day activity of the user, with the knowledge that they've got a really good classification of the document in the background. If that document ever is opened, it's protected correctly.
Patrick, if I may, I have a question for Matthias. I'm interested, Matthias, in your perspective of the regulatory landscape in Switzerland, and our organizations looking at the Swiss regulatory environment, or GDPR, as the important drivers from a regulation standpoint.
So Ronan, I cannot switch on my webcam because there are 3 on, but okay. I think that doesn't matter. So in terms of how regulation is driving data classification here, was that the?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think so. Despite Switzerland not being part of the European Union, GDPR has had a lot of impact here and created a lot of engagement and projects. With many of the firms. So yes, that's GDPR topic and is obviously a driver. But I would also see right now, I see it more the topic of getting an understanding of your data in order to enable the cloud, in order to enable new ways of running your IT, but also in order to manage risks that is related to, sometimes it's called business managed IT, sometimes we call it shadow IT. I think it depends a bit on the point of view. But basically to get a real understanding of your risk exposure and to enable all those new ways of handling IT. So I think while in the past compliance was probably the main driver, right now it is enabling, which is more of a driver.
Yes, I think to add to that point, I saw a very interesting use case several months ago now, where Boeing had spun up numerous servers in AWS, and one of the servers had a large repository of intellectual property, which was in the form of a code base for one of their aircrafts. And it had been migrated as part of a large data migration, and that specific data was never hardened. It was never locked down, and subsequently it was found with open access by by a team of researchers, and Boeing took some pretty bad coverage and press from that specific incident. So I think that's a good example to your point.
I think it's getting always more difficult to basically get away with insufficient data classification. And as I mentioned in the beginning, if I would think of what are the kind of the key capabilities as an organization that you need to have to cover your data risk, but also, and that is cyber risk, including cyber risk, including the compliance angles, but also to really take the benefits of what the cloud offers, of what artificial intelligence offers, of what analytics offer. The two key capabilities for me are really data classification, number one, and number two is identity and access management, which is another difficult topic.
Yeah, and I believe the identity access management goes at two layers. It goes at the network layer and the application layer, and then it goes at a granular data layer as well.
Yes, and I think with that zero trust, and there's a lot of discussion around that, and you said it right, it's not a new concept. However, and we speak for many years in security about getting rid of the perimeter. We won't get rid of the perimeter, but in order to manage and have data under control today, you need to go on that more granular level that you just alluded to, or that you just mentioned.
I entirely agree.
Okay, I have a couple of other questions there, if that's okay, if I can butt in. Do you mind, Ronan?
Sure.
Matthias? Okay. One question is from Man Y. He asks, does the use of Getvisibility require sending data, e.g. document content, to email externally to the Getvisibility system? I guess, Derek, that's one for you, or Ronan.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Derek, could I jump in for a moment on that? And then you can of the technicalities. But when we built Getvisibility from day one, the entire project was designed with a security by design methodology. Our client base are typically large global corporate enterprises, and one of the caveats with customers of that size and scale is that we never touch the data, we never see the data, we never move the data. The entire process is designed and delivered in such a way that all of the software can remain within your architecture, and that can supplement very complex and diverse architectural deployments. So we do private cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, in every aspect that clients require it in, and we never get any visibility, excuse the pun, of the data, and that remains within your estate and your environment. Sorry, Derek.
Sure. No, you're right, Ronan. You've stolen my thunder, but it's true. Our software operates entirely within the perimeter of your network, if required. There are no external connections or services that the system is built around. We're able to install without internet connection. We're able to run and operate the system without any internet connection by design. One of the other things I wanted to point out was the anonymization goes further than just protecting the perimeter. And because, as we've just had a discussion on the zero trust architecture, what we do is we convert every document or email we see within about 0.3 of a second into a mathematical representation, which we call a vector. And that vector is the only thing that gets handed over from software service to service until it's classified. So the software itself looks very briefly at the document or email, and then it uses this representation, which is a set, by the way, of 50 floating point values in a vector. And that's all we use. Our software, the reporting, the machine learning is all built around that anonymized version of the document or email. So even within the system itself, the microservices that are part of the software architecture and the database is only keeping track of this anonymized version of the document. So we go a lot further. We actually have a zero trust architecture around our microservices.
Okay, can I just add to that, Derek? I think it's a very important point, particularly here for Switzerland. A number of years ago, there was a survey done amongst CISOs and CIOs in relation to whether they would put their data outside of Switzerland, and it's actually, they said no. So that was one of the reasons that Microsoft and a number of other large organizations set up their own data centers here. So it's a very, very valid question because there is no way it will be accepted in the Swiss market otherwise. There's another question that just came in that was asked by Martin. And he wants to know, how's the AI, the training and the machine learning done? Obviously,
Sure.
Explain that.
Ronan, do you want to actually, no, let me take that one. So what happens is there are the two mechanisms that I've described briefly during the presentation. The one is when a user is classifying a document differently to what we have got classified by our existing machine learning. Call it machine learning model version 10. The user is then making changes which are different. And this is a known expert user. We can then harvest or log those changes, the discrepancy between what the user is saying and what we think, and we can convert that into a vector format, which I described. And that vector format is then used to rebuild the model, which is then generating a model version 11 in my example. That version 11 has then learned the differences or the tweaks or the improvements that expert user has driven by just doing their normal day-to-day activity. The other way to train it is for staff to look at exported, refined or distilled or filtered views of the data. For example, looking at all the invoices in a particular share drive and looking at the data and saying, okay, we see that there's invoices are correctly classified, but you are labeling a proprietary new type of document that you didn't know about as an invoice. And there's an example of those documents. We would like to call these documents, and then they give us a proprietary or a different name. So what we're doing there is we're having to expand the machine learning model to learn a new type of data. And this is also what Ronan alluded to in his summary about the system learning your data. We can take vectors of those new documents, add a new type of taxonomy tag from that matrix that I showed, and the machine learning model, using the vector format, which is the mathematical description, can learn to understand new types of data like that whenever it encounters it in the future, either during another big automated scan or when somebody actually creates one of those documents on the fly. We'll then have basically learned that new type of data. So those are the two ways that the system can be improved or trained. And it's built with this in mind. This is not an add-on. This is something that is part of the system's normal day-to-day operation. It can be turned off, and you can take new updates from Getvisibility without doing any internal training. But we've seen that the convergence to learn new types of data is faster if the customer turns this feature on, which again is entirely in-house.
Okay. There's another question there in relation to the multilingual capabilities of the software. I think it's a very valid point.
I think I'll take that for a moment. I think that's very important, especially with Switzerland. You'll have a very healthy mix of French, German, and English. We have a lot of language requirements in different parts of the world, from Arabic to English, to French, to German. So the model and the platform supports all languages, and from deployment, it will classify French data, German data, and even Arabic and English data with no problem whatsoever. Derek, from a technical standpoint, you want to maybe touch on how that's done?
Sure. Yes, we've built it to be completely flexible language-wise. It's very easy to localize the system, and that is because we have built a large portion of the machine learning pipeline operates on a language agnostic representation of the document. Now took some actual real R&D to define a mathematical space that is able to represent business documents across the world in a generic way. But we have a part of our machine learning pipeline that looks at the text, converts it into the vector. That's very quick, as I said, but once we've got that vector, it's actually possible to map that particular vector to an invoice, regardless of the source language. So we've got the source, the language aware model layer, which operates with the normal text, but then it very quickly gets converted to the anonymized vector, and that's language agnostic. So the rest of the platform is built around a language agnostic model, which is a special mathematical space we've created for our machine learning.
Okay. Ronan, maybe you'd like to wrap up. We're just on the hour now, so if there's I don't see any more questions coming through. Unless anybody has a question, we'll stay on and we'll answer them for you. Yeah, maybe I'll just hand over to you, Ronan.
There's one just come in from Paul.
Oh, I just spotted it, yeah. It was mentioned during the presentation feature releases of Getvisibility. Do you have a slide showing the roadmap and the product service rollout? Thank you for the very interesting, valuable presentation. Oh,
yeah, absolutely, Paul. We will share that with you after the presentation. And in terms of some of the features from a roadmap perspective, it's quite interesting. It goes into the area of data lineage, blockchain, traceability, mobile. So yeah, we'll certainly share that with you, and thank you. I guess to wrap up, I was very much looking forward to being out in Zurich this week. Unfortunately, due to this pandemic, that had to be put on the long finger. I see a lot of people I know on the webinar today from various different companies that we have worked with and met with over the years. And when this is over, I very much look forward to the opportunity to meet again in person. I think what you will have seen today is how there can be very practical applications of AI and ML to deal with what is actually quite a sophisticated challenge. I was I'm continually very impressed with the team in KPMG and Matthias, and how much in tune they are with the pain points of getting unstructured data accurately classified, safely migrated to the cloud. So we have some very good and strategic partners in Switzerland. And if there is anything you would like to learn more about Getvisibility or to demo the product, we'd be delighted to follow up with you after this. So that's all from me, Patrick. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you very much, Ronan. Thank you very much, Matthias and Derek. I really appreciate your time. As Ronan mentioned, if there's anything you require, most of you already know me, just reach out and I'll be in touch shortly. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, everybody.